Imagine owning so much wealth that you could buy Twitter, Apple, Microsoft, and still have billions left over for lunch. Now imagine doing it before the internet, before skyscrapers reached the clouds, before income tax even existed. That's not fantasy. That's John D. Rockefeller, the richest man in human history. Adjusted for inflation, his fortune would sit at a staggering $631 billion as of 2024, according to the Guinness World Records. That's not just rich, that's untouchable. Richer than Musk, richer than Bezos, richer than the entire GDP of some first world nations. But this isn't just a story about money. This is the story of how he got it. Because Rockefeller didn't climb a golden ladder, he built a blood-soaked empire, one crushed competitor at a time. His tool of choice? Not violence, but absolute control. He didn't break the rules, he rewrote them. What if I told you that behind every gallon of oil, every light bulb you ever flicked on, there's a shadow of this man watching? That the gasoline powering your freedom might have been born from a monopoly so ruthless, the US government had to invent antitrust law just to stop him? He wasn't a king, he was the kingmaker. He didn't run for office. He owned the people who did. And it all began with dirt, literal dirt, black, viscous, slippery oil oozing from the Pennsylvania ground in the 1860s. Back then it was called black gold. To Rockefeller it was more than gold, it was godhood. He saw what others missed, a chance not just to join the game, but to rig it. To seize control of a resource so vital it would fuel the engines of capitalism for the next 100 years. He didn't drill for oil. He drilled into people's futures, people's dreams, people's souls. This is the true story of how John D. Rockefeller became a deity in dollars. But don't expect a sanitized biography. This isn't a bedtime story. This is about the man whose father was a snake oil salesman, whose company manipulated entire railroads, who was both worshipped and hated, who gave away $500 million while still being called the most evil man in America. You think capitalism is brutal today? Wait until you see where it learned its tricks. From the South Improvement Company scandal that reeked of backroom corruption, to the 1890s exposés by Ida Tarbell that blew the lid off Standard Oil's stranglehold on the economy, this is a tale of ambition so monstrous it reshaped the entire global economy. He wasn't a CEO, he was a godfather of greed. And yet, he built universities, he cured diseases, he defined philanthropy. So which was he? A savior who elevated millions, or a devil who strangled competition and left a legacy of inequality so vast we're still choking on it? In 2025, his name still casts a shadow. From the Rockefeller Foundation's role in public health to family ties in modern politics, his fingerprints are everywhere. So let me ask you directly, was John D. Rockefeller the greatest businessman in history, or its most dangerous villain? Before you answer, hear the whole truth. Because the deeper you dig into his past, the dirtier it gets. And next, we meet the man behind the monster, a boy born in 1839, raised in lies, taught by a criminal father, a child of God who would grow up to play one. Ready? Let's rewind the clock. To the beginning, before the oil, before the empire, before the headlines and the billions. There was just a boy, born July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York, a place so small you could blink and miss it. John Davison Rockefeller entered a world already steeped in secrets. The man who would one day control 90% of America's oil supply couldn't even control his own father. Because his father, William Avery Rockefeller, wasn't your average dad. He was a con artist, a traveling snake oil salesman, and a self-proclaimed botanic physician with no medical degree. Locals called him Devil Bill, and not as a joke. He sold fake cures. He vanished for months. He juggled wives, lovers, and identities. He even posed as a blind man to scam his own neighbors. And what did he teach young John? Not math, not scripture, but the art of manipulation. William Rockefeller told his son something that would shape the boy's soul. Cheat if you must, but never get caught. This was the moral foundation of the man who would one day redefine morality for American business. And his mother, Eliza Davison, a devout Baptist, calm, disciplined, the polar opposite. She taught John thrift, prayer, and obedience. The result? A psychological war zone, two voices in his head, one whispering righteousness, the other preaching ruthless survival. By the time John was 16, he wasn't dreaming of riches, he was calculating them. He took his first job as a bookkeeper at age 16, making 50 cents a day. But even then, his eye wasn't on his paycheck, it was on power. He would lend money to his co-workers with interest. He would keep 2 ledgers, one for business, one for his dreams. And his dream? To control, to dominate, to never ever be at the mercy of men like his father again. He tracked every penny he spent, not for frugality, for dominion. By age 20, he wasn't just saving, he was investing. He teamed up with Maurice Clark in a commodities venture. But even then, Rockefeller showed his true nature. When he got tired of Clark, he bought him out in a silent auction. Rockefeller secretly bid $72,500, outbidding his partner in a chess move worthy of Wall Street legends. And that was before oil even entered the picture. But let's not skip over the darkest truths. Rockefeller's father, Devil Bill, didn't just lie to townsfolk. He raped a housekeeper, Margaret Allen, and fathered children he never claimed. One of them, Clara Allen, was likely Rockefeller's half-sister. That's the bloodline that built America's richest fortune. We don't talk about it in textbooks, we don't teach it in schools. But this is the reality. John D. Rockefeller, the paragon of Protestant capitalism, was raised by a criminal, forged in duplicity and baptized in control. He wasn't born with a silver spoon. He stole the recipe, melted it down, and forged a crown. But what does a boy raised on manipulation do when he sees a liquid gold rush erupting in Pennsylvania? He doesn't rush in like the rest. He watches, waits, plans, and then he pounces. Next, you'll witness the moment John D. Rockefeller meets oil and turns America's wild boom into a corporate slaughterhouse. The game was about to begin, and he never played fair. 1859, Western Pennsylvania. A hole in the ground begins to bubble. It's not water, it's not gold, it's something worse, oil. And just like that, a nation goes mad. Men abandoned farms, fled cities, and flooded the oil fields with blind ambition. It was chaos, fires, explosions, fortunes made and lost in days. This was the Wild West of energy, and everyone wanted a piece, except one man. John D. Rockefeller didn't chase oil. He hunted it. He let the fools go wild. He let them dig, drill, and destroy. And once the market was flooded with too much crude and too few profits, he moved in, cold, calculated, surgical. In 1863, he formed Andrews, Clark & Co., his first oil refinery business in Cleveland, not in the oil fields. Why? Because Rockefeller wasn't interested in getting dirty. He was interested in owning the men who did. By 1865, he bought out his partners again, just like before, renaming the firm Rockefeller and Andrews. It was his first full step into the industry and his first real step into war. He didn't drill, he refined, he didn't pump, he controlled the flow. Refining was the choke point. Whoever owned the refining process could decide who lived, who went bankrupt, who begged for scraps. And Rockefeller was about to choke the entire industry. He didn't just negotiate railroad shipping rates, he blackmailed his way into them. He whispered into the ears of the rail barons and asked for rebates, secret discounts for moving his oil. They agreed, but he wanted more. He wanted drawbacks. What's a drawback? It meant railroads would give Rockefeller a cut of the shipping fees paid by his competitors. Imagine that. Your rival pays to ship oil, and a portion goes into your pocket. Legal extortion. Institutionalized theft. By 1869, Rockefeller was already controlling the price of oil, not because he produced more, but because he crushed anyone who dared undercut him. In 1870, he officially founded Standard Oil of Ohio, but the real horror began with a name you've never heard, the South Improvement Company. It was a secret cartel, formed in 1871 just after Standard Oil's founding. Rockefeller and a group of railroad insiders made a deal so foul it reads like the plot of a dystopian novel. Railroads would raise rates on everyone else in the oil business, but secretly lower them for Rockefeller. In exchange, he would give them guaranteed volume and exclusive contracts. It was economic warfare. Competitors were ambushed overnight. Entire refineries bankrupted in weeks. Oil producers in Pennsylvania woke up to find their contracts nullified, their shipping costs doubled, their futures incinerated. The outcry was immediate. Violent protests, public fury, investigations. And Rockefeller? He denied everything. He claimed Standard Oil had nothing to do with South Improvement. Even as internal documents tied him to the scheme, he played innocent, a holy businessman, a moral crusader. The South Improvement Company was eventually exposed and shut down. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The message was clear. You either sold to Rockefeller or he destroyed you. By the end of the 1870s, Standard Oil controlled over 90% of US refining capacity, 9 out of 10 barrels. Think about that. Imagine going to a gas station today and having only one choice. That wasn't just the future. That was the past, a past Rockefeller engineered with cold perfection. And as Standard Oil grew, so did the whispers of bribed politicians, of destroyed livelihoods, of men driven to suicide, of competition buried in silence. But the press wasn't ready to challenge him. Not yet. Because Rockefeller didn't just build a business, he built a machine. And that machine was about to devour the entire American economy. Next, monopoly madness. Ida Tarbell sharpens her pen. Rockefeller sharpens his blade. America watches as one man tries to own everything. 1870, Cleveland, Ohio. A cold wind sweeps over the Cuyahoga River. In an unassuming brick office, Standard Oil is born. To the public, it's just another refinery. But behind the scenes, it's a war engine. And at its helm stands a man with dead serious eyes, thin lips, and a calmness so unnerving, even his allies wonder if he feels anything at all. John D. Rockefeller wasn't interested in free markets. He didn't believe in healthy competition. He believed in elimination, and Standard Oil was built to exterminate. Within 2 years of launching, Rockefeller started absorbing competitors like a virus. He used fear, deception, and cold precision. When he made an offer to buy out another refinery, it wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. You can sell out and make money, or stay in and be crushed. And he meant it. How did he do it? Step 1. Control the railroads. He revived his Devil's Pact, those secret rebates and drawbacks. He cut deals with the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Erie, and the New York Central. These weren't just discounts, they were weapons. Competitors couldn't move oil. Their transport costs skyrocketed. But Rockefeller? He moved barrels for next to nothing and got paid when others shipped theirs. Step 2. Silence the press. He placed friendly editors in strategic newspapers. He funded the ones who stayed quiet. And for the noisy ones, his allies bought ad space, then threatened to pull it unless coverage vanished. Step 3. Buy. Everyone. Refinery owners, politicians, inspectors, even his supposed competitors. One by one, they took the check, or took the hit. But when they finally caught wind of the South Improvement Company scandal in 1872, America exploded. It was the first time the nation saw what Rockefeller was really doing. Farmers protested, rival refiners rallied, Pennsylvania erupted, newspapers ran exposes, even Congress sniffed around. And John D. Rockefeller? He vanished from the spotlight, denied involvement, and let the company quietly dissolve. But the damage was irreversible. In just 1 year, Standard Oil acquired 22 rival refineries in Cleveland alone. Not by building a better product, by strangling the supply chain. He called it efficiency. But it was really systematic extermination. And then came the trusts. In 1882, Rockefeller and his advisors invented a brand new corporate structure, the Standard Oil Trust, a legal monster. Dozens of companies, one board, one control center, one man pulling the strings. It allowed him to hide his ownership across multiple entities while still ruling them all. You couldn't track it. You couldn't fight it. It was invisible. Standard Oil became the blueprint for monopolies. By the mid-1880s, it refined over 90% of the oil in the United States. That meant 9 out of 10 barrels, 9 out of 10 lamps lit, 9 out of 10 factories powered. One man, one company, controlling the fuel of an entire industrial empire. And he did it with a smile, a quiet, smug smile. But not everyone was fooled. In the shadows, a woman was watching, writing, planning. Ida Tarbell, her father's refinery had been destroyed by Standard Oil, and she would not forget. While Rockefeller built his empire, she sharpened her pen. The monopoly had a new enemy, and soon America would be forced to ask, is this man building the future or killing it? In the next part, Ida attacks, the public erupts, and Standard Oil begins to crack. But Rockefeller, he's not done crushing, he's just getting started. She was a journalist, a historian, a woman in a man's world, and she was furious. Ida Minerva Tarbell, daughter of an oilman ruined by Standard Oil's tactics, had watched her family's livelihood disintegrate under Rockefeller's efficiencies. But she didn't pick up a pitchfork, she picked up a pen. And in 1902, her pen would become the most dangerous weapon in America. For 2 years, serialized in McClure's magazine, she released what would become the most explosive business expose of the century, the history of the Standard Oil Company. It wasn't just journalism. It was a scalpel, cutting open Rockefeller's empire, layer by layer, exposing the rotten organs underneath. Tarbell documented it all: the secret freight rebates, the use of dummy corporations to trick regulators, the weaponized price cuts that bankrupted rivals overnight, the lies, the cover-ups, the fake competition. She even tracked down internal memos and private correspondence. Her writing wasn't opinion, it was evidence. The public went into shock. Here was the truth. John D. Rockefeller had not built his empire through genius alone. He built it through economic assassination. She wrote, "Mr. Rockefeller has systematically played with loaded dice, and for the first time the American people listened." The myth of Rockefeller as a pious, calm capitalist began to crack. Behind the Baptist hymn singer was a man who crushed cities, ruined families, and rewrote capitalism to serve himself. He was no longer just the richest man alive. He was a villain. But here's the twist. Even as public hatred surged, Rockefeller stayed quiet. He never directly responded to Tarbell, never publicly defended himself, because he didn't have to. By the time her series ended in 1904, Standard Oil was still controlling over 80% of the US oil industry. The trust had tentacles in railroads, banks, and even foreign governments. If America hated him, that was fine. He already owned it. Yet Tarbell's expose had one effect Rockefeller couldn't silence. It awakened the federal government. Under President Theodore Roosevelt, the self-proclaimed trust buster, the Department of Justice finally launched a lawsuit in 1906 under the Sherman Antitrust Act. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was a full-blown declaration of war. The government accused Standard Oil of forming an illegal monopoly, using predatory pricing, engaging in secretive collusion with railroads and banks, deceiving the public, and they had the receipts. Much of them thanks to Ida Tarbell. The trial would drag on, but the consequences were already unraveling. Public trust in monopolies evaporated. Rockefeller's name, once whispered in boardrooms like a prayer, was now shouted in protests like a curse. But here's the part they don't teach in economics class. The trial didn't kill him. It made him even richer. Because when the verdict finally came down in 1911 and the Supreme Court ordered the breakup of Standard Oil, Rockefeller had already shifted his pieces. He owned massive shares in the splinter companies, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Moco. The breakup multiplied his fortune. He lost the war and walked away as the wealthiest man who ever lived. By 1913, he had become America's first billionaire. So ask yourself, was this justice? Or was this the system admitting it could never beat him? In the next chapter, scandals, strikes, and shadows. Because money wasn't the only thing spilled in Rockefeller's rise. There was blood too. You don't build a $600 billion empire without casualties, and John D. Rockefeller's empire wasn't paved in gold. It was drenched in oil and blood. By the early 1900s, Standard Oil had been broken up, on paper, but Rockefeller still reigned from the shadows. And his web stretched far beyond boardrooms. It reached into coal fields, steel mills, rail yards, refineries, and into the lives of workers. Because while Rockefeller played golf and gave interviews about Christian responsibility, the laborers fueling his empire were starving, striking, and dying. Let's talk about Ludlow. Now, technically, Rockefeller didn't own the coal mines where the 1914 Ludlow massacre happened, but his son did. John D. Rockefeller Jr., heir to the empire, held controlling interest in the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, a company that made Standard Oil's business look like a charity. The workers, mostly immigrants, lived in shacks, paid in company scrip, forbidden to unionize, threatened if they spoke out. Children died from malnutrition while Rockefeller profits soared. In 1913, the miners struck. They demanded better pay, safer conditions, and the right to live like humans. What they got was machine guns. On April 20th, 1914, the Colorado National Guard, bought and paid for by company money, opened fire on a tent colony of striking families. Dozens were killed, women, children. A tent was set ablaze. 2 children burned alive in a pit beneath their mother's charred mattress. They called it the Ludlow Massacre. And though Rockefeller Sr. claimed he had no involvement, the public saw through the veil. He tried to do damage control, hired Ivy Lee, the original PR man, to help spin the tragedy. He even visited Colorado, smiled with miners, posed for pictures, shook hands with men whose friends were buried in the hills. But the blood couldn't be washed away. Ludlow became a symbol of unchecked corporate power, of wealth without responsibility, of a system so rigged it could slaughter children and still pay dividends. But scandals didn't stop there. Because behind the oil, behind the violence, behind the money, there were family secrets too. William Rockefeller, John's brother and business partner, was exposed for using aliases to evade taxes and investigators. Some accused him of espionage in South America. Others said he helped set up dummy companies to avoid scrutiny. And then there was Devil Bill, the patriarch. William Avery Rockefeller had faked his own death, taken up with another woman, and fathered illegitimate children while abandoning John's mother. One of those children, Clara Allen, spent her entire life trying to prove she was part of the family, but the Rockefellers denied her, rejected her, erased her. Why? Because the dynasty had to look pure, clean, Protestant, holy, and yet its roots were tangled in fraud, betrayal, and illegitimacy. Even as the Rockefellers built churches, museums, universities, they stomped out anyone who challenged the myth of their perfection. Was it genius or sociopathy? Was this empire built by a man of God or a man who played God? Because while America was rebuilding after Ludlow, the Rockefeller fortune grew larger, safer, immune to the consequences that ruined others. And when the people demanded justice, they got foundations. By the 1910s, Rockefeller was no longer just a name. He was a myth, hated by the public, feared by competitors, worshipped by capitalists, and suddenly, out of nowhere, he became something else. A philanthropist, a generous one. Between 1913 and his death in 1937, John D. Rockefeller gave away over $540 million, a staggering figure in his day, equivalent to billions now. He founded the University of Chicago, bankrolled Spelman College, and created the Rockefeller Foundation, which would go on to shape global health policy, fund vaccine research, and combat diseases from hookworm to yellow fever. The man who once crushed competitors with rail rebates was now funding medical schools. The man who bankrupted towns was building libraries. The same man who handed his son the reins to companies that ordered armed guards on striking miners was now signing checks to save the world. So what happened? Was it guilt, legacy, or something darker? Let's look closer. The Rockefeller Foundation, created in 1913, presented itself as a force for human progress. It funded research into public health, rural development, and scientific breakthroughs. In 1918, it helped establish the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. It played a key role in eradicating diseases in Latin America. It even helped fund the League of Nations Health Organization, the predecessor to the WHO. Noble, right? But here's what they don't tell you. The foundation also advanced eugenics. Yes, eugenics. In the early 20th century, before the horrors of Nazi Germany exposed its true nature, eugenics was considered scientific. And the Rockefeller Foundation gave financial support to institutions that promoted sterilization, selective breeding, and racial pseudoscience. They even provided funding to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany, which later became linked to Nazi racial programs. Let that sink in. The same empire that paid workers starvation wages was now trying to engineer better humans. Was it philanthropy or power rebranded? Was Rockefeller trying to heal the world or reshape it in his image? And remember, this wasn't charity out of desperation. It was strategic. Every dollar donated was tax deductible. Every donation softened the press. Every foundation shielded assets. By 1920, Rockefeller's reputation had transformed. He was no longer just the oil tyrant. He was St. John, smiling, frail, giving away fortunes while posing for photographers with orphans and college deans. But ask yourself, would he have given anything if Ida Tarbell hadn't dragged his name through the mud? Would he have paid a dime if the Ludlow massacre hadn't stained his son's hands? Was this a spiritual awakening or a PR miracle? Even as the foundations cured diseases, America's wealth inequality widened. While Rockefeller donated to medicine, his former companies poisoned the air, the soil, the labor system. He helped save lives. But how many had his empire already destroyed? In his lifetime, he may have been the greatest giver in history, but the money he gave away, it was made from monopolies, from crushed dreams, from smoke, sweat, and suffering. Redemption or reinvention, saint or smokescreen. By the 1920s, the man once called the most hated American had transformed into a smiling old figure, handing out dimes to children, literally. John D. Rockefeller, who once crushed entire cities with the stroke of a pen, became infamous in his later years for handing shiny 10-cent coins to anyone who crossed his path. A bizarre gesture, a publicity stunt, a relic of a man who once counted billions, now giving away pennies as if the world forgot. But Rockefeller hadn't forgotten. He had outlived almost everyone. Carnegie? Dead. J.P. Morgan? Gone. Even Roosevelt, the man who broke up his empire? Buried. Rockefeller had won. And now, he was focused on only one thing: defeating death itself. His obsession with health became the stuff of legend. He took daily blood tests, meticulously tracked every vitamin and supplement. He consulted doctors from around the globe. He maintained a strict diet, almost monk-like, designed to extend his life one more day, one more week, one more year. He bathed in cold water, believed in fresh air therapy, and walked every morning like it was a divine ritual. He drank milk by the gallon and kept detailed journals of his weight, pulse, and sleeping habits. He even developed a hypochondriac's cabinet filled with hundreds of tonics, pills, and treatments. He once said, "If I had to live my life over again, I'd work less and learn how to relax a bit more." But he didn't slow down. Not really. He played golf obsessively, almost daily, even into his 90s, not for leisure, but to compete with death. In private, he feared it. Feared it with the same intensity that made him devour the oil industry. He gave interviews, often repeating himself, drifting between lucidity and script. His mind was sharp, but the world had changed. Automobiles replaced kerosene lamps. His empire, split into dozens of pieces, now bore names like Exxon and Mobil, companies that grew even larger than his original Standard Oil. By the mid-1930s, Rockefeller was America's first centibillionaire by modern standards. If adjusted for today's inflation and GDP share, his net worth in 2025 dollars sits around $631 billion, more than Musk, Bezos, and Gates combined. But all the vitamins in the world couldn't stop the truth. Death comes for everyone. On May 23, 1937, at the age of 97, John D. Rockefeller finally lost the one battle he couldn't control. He died in his sleep at his estate in Ormond Beach, Florida. Peacefully, they said. But let's ask the uncomfortable question. Was it really peaceful? Or had the weight of $600 billion, a broken nation, and an empire built on manipulation finally crushed his soul? His funeral was modest, but his legacy? Anything but. He left behind foundations, universities, medical breakthroughs, and an America forever altered by one man's obsession with control. But the story isn't over, because even in 2025, nearly a century after his death, John D. Rockefeller's name still moves mountains. It's been 88 years since John D. Rockefeller took his last breath. But in 2025, his fingerprints are everywhere. You see his name on universities, museums, and hospitals, on research grants, on vaccines, on policies. But you also see it in the shadows, behind oil giants, financial institutions, and the very structure of American capitalism. Because Rockefeller didn't just build an empire, he built a blueprint. Let's start with the companies. When Standard Oil was broken into 34 pieces in 1911, it wasn't a death sentence, it was duplication. Today, those fragments became monsters of their own: ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP America. Together, these descendants of Standard Oil still control a staggering portion of the global oil supply. In 2024 alone, ExxonMobil reported over $413 billion in revenue, a number Rockefeller could only dream of. And yet, it was his system that made it possible. But the power didn't end with oil. It reached into philanthropy, where Rockefeller's foundations became kingmakers. The Rockefeller Foundation, still active in 2025, controls billions in assets. It funds health initiatives, climate research, economic equity programs, and AI ethics labs. Sounds good, right? But here's the twist. Who decides where that money goes? Unelected boards, billionaire descendants, private meetings. Some critics call it philanthrocapitalism, where billionaires use charity not to solve problems but to control the conversation. In 2025, debates rage on Capitol Hill and in think tanks. Should ultra-rich families be allowed to steer public health, education, and global policy without oversight? And at the center of that debate, the Rockefeller model. Even more disturbing, their influence on climate policy. Yes, the Rockefeller Foundation now funds renewable energy initiatives, but their fortune was built on fossil fuels, and their investments are still tied to oil. Is that redemption, or is it greenwashing by the very architects of the carbon economy? In March 2025, the state of Ohio held a controversial commemoration of Rockefeller's birth. It sparked massive backlash. Activists protested with signs that read, $600 billion of pollution. You can't wash blood with money. Is this who we honor? Yet inside the event, politicians, bankers, CEOs, still praising Rockefeller as a visionary. Meanwhile, the wealth gap in America has never been wider. The top 0.01%, a club Rockefeller built, now owns more than 20% of the nation's wealth, according to a May 2025 report by the Brookings Institution. In other words, Rockefeller's legacy is alive and thriving, not just in name, in system. He taught the world how to use monopolies to suffocate competition, disguise domination as efficiency, wash power in the language of generosity, build dynasties behind the veil of foundations. And today's billionaires? They're just following his script. You think Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, or Mark Zuckerberg invented modern capitalism? No, they're playing Rockefeller's greatest hits. But here's the chilling truth. Rockefeller never needed social media. He didn't tweet, he didn't stream, he didn't post. He just bought everything in his way and smiled while doing it. So now the question is no longer about what he did, it's about what he started. Because even in 2025, John D. Rockefeller may be the most influential man alive who's no longer alive. And if that doesn't haunt you, it should. Let's step back. Let's look at everything, all of it, and ask the one question no one wants to face. What if John D. Rockefeller didn't just become the richest man in history? What if he became the architect of how power works? Let's run the numbers one last time. $631 billion in 2025 adjusted wealth. Over 90% control of the US oil refining industry at his peak. $540+ million given away unadjusted. 34 companies shattered in 1911 that reassembled into modern oil giants. A family dynasty that still controls foundations, funds political causes, and shapes global policy. But behind those numbers lies the real horror. Because Rockefeller didn't just accumulate wealth, he institutionalized it. He created mechanisms of legal domination so powerful they outlasted empires. Standard Oil? Gone in name. But its DNA lives on in ExxonMobil, still one of the biggest companies on Earth. Chevron, pumping oil and profits globally. The Rockefeller Foundation, shaping health and climate agendas. BlackRock and Vanguard, modern financial giants modeled on consolidation and vertical power. The system he pioneered is now automated, programmed into capitalism itself. He proved that monopolies win as long as you call it efficiency. Bribes are legal if you call them rebates. Oppression is invisible if you mask it as innovation. Reputation can be bought, one hospital wing, one university building, one scholarship at a time. And in 2025, we've taken it further. Today, billionaires launch rockets, fund elections, rewrite school curriculums, and no one blinks. Why? Because John D. Rockefeller taught the world that extreme wealth isn't a sin, it's a symbol of divine favor, a virtue, a calling. But he also taught another, darker lesson. If you're rich enough, you can commit economic war crimes in the morning and cut the ribbon on a children's hospital by night. So now, ask yourself, how many of today's philanthropists are laundering legacies? How many of our innovators are repeating the old playbook? How many of us are still living in a world designed by Rockefeller? In June 2025, a Columbia University panel on the legacy of capitalism cited Rockefeller's model as the origin of systemic inequality. In the same month, his great-great-grandson was announced as a climate policy advisor for a global investment group. A Rockefeller, again pulling the levers. Full circle. Because this isn't just history, this is now. We live in the shadow of a man who never held public office, never fought in a war, never made a single vote in Congress, but who bent the American economy and the global future to his will. And he did it not through violence, but through structure. And that's the final revelation. John D. Rockefeller didn't just play the system. He was the system. He started with nothing, born to a con man, raised in the tension between Baptist guilt and predator instinct, armed with ledgers, a cold gaze, and an unshakable belief in his own righteousness. And he ended up with everything. $631 billion in adjusted wealth. Entire industries crushed beneath his fingertips. A global legacy still echoing in the halls of government, oil, philanthropy, and silence. John D. Rockefeller was not just the richest man in history. He was the first data point in a new equation. Wealth equals power equals immunity. And we still haven't solved it. Because here's the final, most dangerous truth. Rockefeller didn't invent corruption. He made it scalable. He didn't kill capitalism. He hacked it. And while we debate whether he was a saint or a monster, the machine he built keeps running. Quietly, invisibly, efficiently. In 2025, as you watch this documentary on a device powered by lithium, connected to servers run by trillion-dollar tech firms, fueled by energy trades tied to conglomerates born from Standard Oil's ashes, you're not just watching history, you're living in it. And the questions it demands aren't polite. Should any one man ever be allowed to control that much power? Can charity ever cleanse the sins of monopoly? Did Rockefeller build a better world, or chain us to one? Is he proof that ruthless ambition is the price of progress? Or a warning that wealth without ethics is just tyranny in disguise? And most importantly, if John D. Rockefeller was the first, who's next? Because look around, we're back in the Gilded Age. The faces have changed, the tools are digital. But the formula? Still his. So as you close this window, as you go back to scrolling, consuming, surviving, ask yourself one final question. Are you free, or are you still living in Rockefeller's world?